going over 5 overlooked security measures that you didn't know you should take. And our goal today is really to cover 5 items that people may not be as aware of as some of the other security features within Google Apps. And we're going to cover those in detail, why they're important, and also some recommended actions that you should take for those particular security measures. A little bit about myself. I've been a drinker of the Google Kool-Aid since 2008. I was actually worked with and helped found one of the companies that did some of the very first migrations over to Google Apps. So I've been 17 plus years in IT, and like I said, since 2008, working almost exclusively with Google Apps. I'm also closely involved with the Google certification process. I have multiple certifications and was really an early adopter and helped work with Google around developing those certification programs and beta testing those. So, to kind of jump into the meat of the presentation, we're going to cover these 5 overlooked security measures. And to kind of give you an idea or a thought that I had as I was doing various research on this topic, I ran into this quote that I really think fits one of the challenges that we have today in IT, and particularly around the cloud. And it says, it used to be expensive to make things public and cheap to make them private. Now it's expensive to make things private and cheap to make them public. And that's an internet scholar out of NYU. And I really think that that fits the challenges that we encounter with cloud. It used to be very difficult, like it says, to make things public. If you just 5, 6 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, if you wanted something public, if you wanted to put something out for the public to have access to, you usually had to build a web page, you had to put it on your website, you had to take numerous steps, usually involving a couple people on your staff to do it. So it was very easy to keep everything private, to keep everything on-premise, behind a firewall. It was all private. Anything you wanted outside of that got expensive. Now the opposite is true. Now with Google Apps and Google Docs, you can share something out private or public, depending on your settings, within a matter of seconds, and almost anyone in the organization can do it. So now we're having the challenge of how do we keep that wall and keep private what we need to keep private, but still allow people to have the collaboration advantage of being able to share things publicly and to be able to move at the speed at which business moves today. So with that as kind of our backdrop, the 5 topics we're going to cover, the first one is what I call full user deprovisioning. And this is really intended to make sure that as we deprovision users, whether they leave on their own or whether it's someone that gets terminated from your organization, so you need to remove them quickly, we want to make sure that we're taking all the appropriate steps to fully deprovision that user while also maintaining the data that your company has spent money and time to build up in that user's account. We're also going to cover Google Group Access. I think this is one of the really neat features within Google is what you can do with groups, but I think at times they're often misunderstood either by end users or perhaps by administrators on how you configure groups and how you make them accessible and the right type of settings set up within groups. We're going to cover the publishing of Google Docs, a little known feature in Google that we want to make sure we're aware of and managing appropriately. We're going to talk about email content compliance. Again, email is still the way most people communicate and collaborate nowadays, so we want to make sure that we're handling email content compliance correctly. And then we're going to cover user OAuth access. That's basically where users give permission to their Google Apps data or to other systems data for apps to use. And that's a huge area that's growing every day as new browser plugins, new mobile apps. Every day there's new challenges around OAuth access. So we're going to talk about some of the methods you can use to control that and manage that and make sure that we're setting up access correctly. So after all this, we also plan on having time for questions. So if you have questions throughout this, you can enter them directly into the questions. We're going to try to save all of those until the end. and then we'll try to get through as many as we can. So the first topic we're going to cover is full user deprovisioning. Again, deprovisioning is something that almost every organization does at some point or another to make sure that as users leave the organization, you're not only locking out their access, which is the first step of any deprovisioning, removing access so that the user that's no longer part of your organization can access data, but then also the transferring of that information to make sure that that information that your company spent money and time to develop is still accessible to the people that are still within your organization. So we're going to take both of these topics kind of separately, and we're going to go through kind of the things to consider when you're removing access. For some organizations, it may be as simple as changing a password, updating an SSO system, but there's a lot of other nuanced things that go beyond just the user's password that we want to make sure we're taking care of. The second area that we'll cover is transferring drive documents. And we'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about the other sets of data out there that you want to make sure that you capture and transfer so that you don't lose any of that data from the user's account. Removing access. The stat on the right-hand side there should be kind of eye-opening that 89% of ex-employees retained access to corporate apps. That's a fairly large number. I mean, that's 9 out of 10 ex-employees that leave still have access to a company's corporate data in some way, shape, or form. And this is what we talk about when we say removing access. We want to make sure that we do as complete and as thorough of a job as we can to remove all access points. And as users get more and more into leveraging mobile devices and bringing your own devices plans and accessing from any place, anywhere, those type of things that really help them do their job better, that also creates more areas where they're accessing your data, accessing your network or your Google Apps system potentially. So we want to make sure we close all of those access points. So the first and probably most obvious one, and usually the first step in deprovisioning anyone, is you want to change the user's Google password. A lot of organizations actually may not change the user's Google password. They may say, well, we leverage an SSO system, so they don't use their Google Apps password. Maybe they don't even know their Google Apps password. But what through surveys and research we've found is that a lot of times, whether it's through mobile devices, whether it's through apps, there's multiple or specific app passwords, those type of things. We want to make sure that we're locking out that password. And even if you don't think there's any time that they've used that password, you want to make sure that you change it so that you're locking out any access they may have. Again, if you're leveraging an SSO system, you want to make sure that you update that. That's always going to be the first method that they try to get back in. Whether it's intentional or not, they may attempt to log into the system through their SSO, and they may have their browser set to automatically remember passwords, some of those kind of things. So it may not be an intentional access, but they may launch their browser and suddenly it logs into their work email through SSO. So you want to make sure you update those systems and remove their access. The other area that we'll hit on again later on in this is revoking third-party access. Again, third-party apps are anything from a browser plugin to a mobile app to even a custom script in their Google Drive spreadsheet. Any of these things they've given permission or access to their Google Apps data, so you want to make sure that you're taking that into account and removing that access when the user leaves the organization. Like I said before, you can, depending on your setup, users can set up app-specific passwords. We've had incidents in the past where they think that they've totally locked out a user, but they have an app-specific password set up on their iPhone or an iPad at home that still provides them access into their corporate email, and they're able to pull down and read email and potentially interact with it. And again, even if they're not doing this in a sense of harming your company, you want to make sure that you close that loophole as quickly as possible. The last two items are around email. And these are things that, again, are often overlooked. You want to make sure that each user that has left, that you review their email delegation. There's a lot of necessary and important reasons why people will delegate their email account. Maybe they're going on sabbatical, maybe they were gone for 2 weeks, maybe their manager just wants them to delegate their email account. So there's a lot of valid reasons to do it, but that's also a gap that you want to make sure you close, because if a user leaves and just before they leave, just before they give their notice, they delegate their email out to their Gmail account, then suddenly you may change all the passwords all the way around, but they still can go in through their Gmail account and that delegated access and still read and review emails that are coming in. The other area that you want to check is email forwarding. We've had a lot of users in the past that maybe based on your network and some of those type of things, you've got it locked down so that they can't access their email anywhere but on your network, which is great if that's your security model. But a lot of times to get around that, users will set up a forwarding rule and forward their email to their personal account or their Yahoo account or something like that. You want to make sure that as users leave, that you're turning off that forwarding if they have it in place. They also may have some actual legitimate forwarding rules in there. Maybe they get some personal emails or emails from their kid's school into their work account, and so they've set up a rule that just automatically forwards those onto their personal account. You want to make sure that any of those rules you disable. You want to make sure that they don't have rules that are forwarding information that could potentially be sensitive out to other email addresses outside your organization. So once we've removed access, we've got them locked out of the system, which is kind of the first half of deprovisioning. The second half really centers around transferring of their data. Again, you've spent money accumulating this data, accumulating this knowledge. You want to make sure that you don't just delete their Google Apps account and lose access to all this data. The first step in this is really around Google Drive. That's where the majority of their documents are going to be, and you want to make sure that you transfer that data. The keys to that is you can obviously, through the control panel, you can do just a bulk transfer of documents. Anytime you can get some intelligence around that transfer, it's going to be more valuable and more meaningful to your company. So if you have tools or scripts out there where you can possibly transfer select files to select people, that makes for a much more intelligent transfer, and people are going to know what data is coming their way and what to do with it. Another thing that you want to check is you want to review any publicly shared documents. We've had organizations in the past that have transferred all their documents to a single administrator account, and so everyone who leaves, their documents get transferred over there. And as an organization, you feel like that's secure. But if someone went in the week before they left and made a whole bunch of their documents public, even after you transfer, those documents are going to remain public. So they still have access to them. They're still exposed to the outside world. They're still captured by Google's web crawlers and those type of things. So you want to make sure that as part of transferring documents, that it's not just a bulk dump into a manager's account, that you put some intelligence behind it where you can, and also that you're reviewing the sharing, and particularly the public sharing of documents, to make sure you're eliminating any risks with those. Once we get beyond docs, we want to make sure that we can capture the other items. So the other thing you want to transfer ownership of is Google Sites. Maybe the user was a heavy sites builder and they built multiple project sites and that type of stuff. You don't want to lose access to that. So you want to make sure that you transfer ownership out of their Google account over to another Google account within your organization. You also want to look at any secondary calendars. Again, particularly if they're project managers or doing project-based work, a lot of times you set up project calendars, you set up maybe vacation calendars for the department. Anything like that, you want to make sure that you transfer ownership of that. Those become very powerful tools within your organization, but if you delete that account, you sometimes lose access to that data and lose access to transfer that data. The next area is group ownership. Again, if you have a user who's left the organization, you want to make sure that that the group ownership is taken care of. If they're responsible for managing a group, owning a group, adding new members, moderating a group, any of those type of things within a group, you want to make sure that you take care of those. And then the last area, which again is not necessarily overlooked, I think it's something that a lot of organizations think about, but you want to consider it, is delegating their email access. If you're going to leave their account in a non-suspended form, if you're not going to delete it or suspend it, you want to make sure that you delegate their email access and maybe even set up an out-of-office response that directs people that are still sending them email, not aware that they've left the organization, that they get the proper response and that action gets taken. The second overlooked area that I want to cover is around Google Group access. And again, Google Groups are an incredibly powerful tool within Google. They can be a lot of different things. They go well beyond just a simple distribution list. A lot of times organizations set them up initially as distribution lists, but they can be feedback forums, they can be ways to distribute information across your company, they can be project-based groups that allow you to capture all of those emails into a single archive. So there's a lot of different use for Google Groups, but there's also a lot of confusion around Google Groups. So if you set up a Google Group and you want to go through each of the settings pages, it's actually 15 plus pages of settings for each group. And a lot of times people don't necessarily understand what each page of setting means and what it means when they select one option or another. So you want to make sure that you're educating your users and that you're taking advantage of all the things that Google Groups has to offer, but you're doing it in a secure and controlled way. You also want to be particularly careful of this if your organizations allow users to create groups on their own. Again, a powerful tool depending on your organization, but you want to make sure that you have control over that. You also want to make sure that you're monitoring public access. Again, you can have a group that is exposed to the public that anyone can join, which is a great way to distribute information, but you want to be aware of that, and you want your users to be aware of that. Most end users are going to think that if they're emailing a group within your domain, that it's just going to other members of the organization, that it's not going out to the public, when in fact it could be going out to the public and it may have information that maybe you don't want to share publicly. And again, like I said at the beginning, most view Google Groups as simply distribution lists. If you educate your users and really start to leverage some of the features in Google Groups, they're a great tool. Some of our recommendations around Google Groups, again, you want to make sure that they're properly configured and that your content is secure. So, like I said before, educate your users on group settings. Whether you allow them to create groups or not, or if you allow them to be an owner, they have the ability to update and change those group settings. So you want to make sure that they understand what they're changing and what the difference in checking a single checkbox could really mean in terms of the data that's contained within that group. The key areas that we like to educate users on, number one is posting permission. That's basically who has access to post to that Google group. And there are multiple different settings within the posting permissions. You want to make sure that they understand what each one means. Also the archive options. You want to make sure that when they turn on the archiving that they really understand that that's going to capture everything mailed to that group and other members can go in and review it. Again, a very powerful tool. I know that in the past when I did project-based work, this was a great way to set up a group for the project. You always copy that group, and then if someone new joins that project team, they can go back and have access and review all the emails that have been sent. So again, a very powerful tool, but you need to make sure that you execute it properly. And the last area that we think takes special consideration is moderation settings. Particularly if you're going to have a public group, people in the public that are joining that group are going to assume the majority of what's posted in there is posted from your organization, or at least in some level kind of represents your organization. So you may want to make sure that people understand moderation settings, and that way you can block some of the postings that may be inappropriate or unprofessional or not really apply to that particular group's message. We recommend that you schedule regular reviews of the group settings for all Google groups. And whether this is a script that pulls a report of all the settings, whether it's a third-party tool that pulls all the settings, we recommend that you review these regularly. Again, if standard users have access, they're going to make changes and updates. So you want to make sure that you're keeping a close eye on that. And whether that's a every 2-week review, once a month, once a quarter, whatever is right for your organization, make sure that you have a process in place to review all of your group settings around Google Groups. You also want to closely manage group ownership. You want to make sure that the people that are made owners of groups are aware what that ownership means, that they're educated on the settings, and that they understand what responsibility comes with that. This again, if we go back to the initial point of fully deprovisioning users, you want to make sure that you transfer that group ownership, but along with that additional responsibility, that users get some additional training or some additional education on what becoming a group owner means and what they have access to. And the last item is restrict who can create groups in your organization. Again, if you're a smaller organization, a lot of times they let users create groups, but you want to make sure that you have some controls on it, that through your review process that you're reviewing these groups. I've found that a lot of organizations that allow end users to create groups end up with 30 or 40 groups that are all named test something. And it was just a user going in trying to figure out what a Google group is, what is this thing I have access to, what can I do here, and you end up with a lot of wasted groups. Again, it's a good way for them to learn, but you want to make sure that you, in your review process, remove those groups that don't necessarily apply. Publishing of Google documents. This is a method that some people may be very familiar with. It's been in Google for a while, but it's kind of a loophole that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to, kind of around Google's Drive sharing. Google allows users to what they refer to as publish a document, and that makes it so that anyone on the web can see it. Again, a great feature, it allows you to easily embed a document or embed a presentation. It's got some nice features that on presentations it's going to automatically advance it based on what your setting is, all of those kind of things. Well, when you do that, you may go in and look at a document and it's still marked as private even though it is published to the web. So you can see here I went into a domain that I own and I published a document to the web. It gave me a link. I went through all the process to publish it, and then I went into the sharing settings, and if I just look at the sharing settings of that document, it looks like it's private. It looks like I'm the only one that can access it, when in fact that link is public, and that link could be potentially shared out with multiple people. It could be posted on multiple websites. There could be all sorts of access to that document, even though I go in and look at the sharing settings and say, you know what, this is private. I don't have to worry about this document. So again, just another kind of loophole that you want to make sure that you're paying close attention to as you configure your Google Apps domain, and particularly as you educate your users on the different settings within Google Drive. Again, one of the nice things about the publish feature is that you can disable it. Again, this doesn't disable people from sharing a document publicly. It doesn't even necessarily disable them from publishing it to the web or embedding it into a website. There's multiple different ways you can do that without leveraging this publishing feature. So if it's something you're concerned about, if it's something that you want to make sure you have tight controls around, you can actually go in the control panel and you can disable this feature through your Drive settings. And you just go to, in the control panel, you go to Google Apps, you go to your Drive app, and you go to the sharing settings, and you can see there's a checkbox that you can uncheck to basically prevent users from being able to publish documents. Again, a great feature if you leverage it correctly. Google in their video, when they talk about this feature, they talk about restaurants publishing weekly specials and all of that kind of stuff. A great tool if it fits into your organization, but it could potentially be a loophole that allows people to share publicly without you being aware of it, because when you go in and look at the document, it's marked as private. The fourth area is email content compliance. Again, the statistic there, 100 billion emails are sent and received every day. That's just a staggering number, and I don't know how many different apps have come out, from social media apps to chat apps, that we're going to be the quote-unquote email killer. And that's been happening for the last 15 years. Everyone agrees that we get too much email, that it's too much for us to process. We need a better way to do this, but we continue to leverage email as the main source for sharing information. So the key that you want to do is make sure that you're putting some content compliance rules on these emails. You want to make sure that you're doing some checks before those leave your domain, before those leave your Google Apps instance, to make sure that information you don't want shared out is not being shared out, that information you don't want sent across the wire is not being done with that. We talk a lot about Google Drive and the sharing controls around those. One of the things about Google Drive is that you can actually pull back that sharing. Email is very different. Once an email leaves in your organization, you no longer have any controls on it. So you want to make sure that you put those controls on at the edge of your domain to make sure that email isn't getting out that shouldn't. So again, Google provides some content compliance within the security section of the control panel. Actually, the email security section of the control panel. So you want to make sure that you leverage those. Again, a lot of organizations have recently transferred over from Postini. And as part of that, Google put together a fairly robust set of tools to transfer you over and to transfer some of the rules and the features that you may have had in Postini over. We recommend that you review those settings. There are times where things get kind of lost or jumbled in translation. There's also some different settings that you have within Google that you didn't have within Postini, and there's also some things that are interpreted a little bit differently in Google than they were in Postini, or set up a little bit differently is maybe a better way to put it. One of the nice things about Google's content compliance is that it offers full regular expressions. And for those people that aren't familiar with regular expressions, these are essentially a way of writing a set of characters that's going to go out and look for certain types of data within your email. So you can build these around social security numbers, you can build these around credit cards, you can do a lot of powerful things with regular expressions. We recommend that as you roll out regular expressions that you test them fairly thoroughly. I always say that writing a regular expression is a little bit more of an art than a science. Maybe that's just who I am, but I believe that you want to make sure that you test those thoroughly. A funny example I wrote a regular expression not too long ago and messed up a little bit and managed to capture every single Drive document within Google Drive because I had it coded to capture anything that had a space in it. And that happens to be every single Drive document that we have in our Google Drive instance. So again, you want to make sure with regular expressions, very powerful, make sure you're leveraging them correctly and that you're testing them within your environment. And another thing to keep in mind, again, if you moved over from Postini, is that all users must be registered, or accounts must be registered for the outbound content compliance rules to apply. It used to be with Postini, anything you sent outbound and routed through Postini automatically got the outbound content compliance. In Google, if you're routing something, maybe it's relaying from a different server, maybe you have a hybrid environment, whatever the case may be, they need to be registered in Google in order for that content compliance to review and potentially capture data. Again, as you go into configure content compliance, you go into the control panel, apps, Google Apps, Gmail, and advanced settings is where you'll find content compliance. There's some other things beyond content compliance. There's also objectionable content and attachment compliance. Strongly recommend that you also look at those to configure them. But with content compliance, you have some various settings that you can review, again, you want to make sure that you're applying it to the right documents. And one of the nice things they have is that you can have it for just inbound and outbound. Those are actually emails that are leaving your organization. So they're being sent to someone outside. You may not want content compliance within your organization because there may be business reasons why people are sending things back and forth to each other within your organization that may fall outside of content compliance. So you want to make sure you review those settings and set them up correctly. Also remember that they can be applied by OU. So take that into account as you configure them, and maybe your finance OU or your human resources OU has a little bit different settings than your standard OU or your marketing OU or some of those other departments. And again, make sure that you're going through and setting up the expressions correctly, whether it's a simple content match, whether it's a regular expression. And then also the last area after you've set up who it applies to or what message it applies to, and then what you want to capture, you want to make sure that you take the right action. And that right action can be rerouting it to a different, maybe you have a holding account that these all go to. Maybe you want to just apply a header to it. You can also do various other different things with messages. So you want to make sure that you take the right approach after you've captured that, after you've set up your expressions to capture the data that you want to capture. The fifth and final area we're going to discuss today, and we hit on this earlier, but managing user OAuth access. We all have multiple apps that we leverage to get more out of our Google environment, whether those be mobile apps, whether those be browser plugins. I know that I have browser plugins that I use to help me with spelling and grammar on emails. I also have some that help me plan or organize travel. All of these apps are using OAuth to access my Google Apps data. And me as an end user, I've at some point clicked and approved that. I've said that, yeah, I will allow you to read my email or write Google Drive documents. And this is potentially a huge security risk for your organization. You want to make sure that you've got controls in place and settings in place so that users aren't accidentally sharing out access that they shouldn't be sharing out. Or at a minimum that users are aware that maybe that travel app that they've installed is actually reading through all their email, and do they want them to do that? And is that potentially leading to risk for your organization? Again, these can be anything from mobile apps to browser plugins, even custom scripts within your Drive instance. You write a custom script in AppScript for a spreadsheet in Google Drive. You're actually giving that permission to run and to access various pieces of your data within your Google Apps instance. Again, our recommendation is that you leverage the tools that are out there to restrict this. So within the Google Apps console, you can actually do the Drive data access settings. So you can lock down the access to Google Drive and who has data or who can allow apps to access that. We also recommend that you look at some of the Chrome Store access settings, whether you're going to set up a private Chrome Store for your organization or set up restrictions on what they can install within Chrome. There's a very large set of business tools within the Chrome browser and within a Chrome environment that can really limit and control what browser settings, what add-ons and those type of things your users are able to access and able to install. And mobile device management. Again, Google has come out. This is an area that's growing very rapidly within Google with the whitelisting of apps on the iOS side and with Android for Work. You suddenly have a lot more controls around mobile device management. There's also potential for several third-party mobile device management tools. And these will help you, again, have even more granular control of mobile devices and what type of apps and data they're accessing. We also recommend that you leverage a policy-based tool that allows you to restrict and revoke access for apps. You want to make sure that you've got that set up and configured and that you're aware of all the apps that are installed and you're taking appropriate action when there's apps that shouldn't be installed and that you're revoking that. And again, education of users is huge on this. We had a conference not too long ago and someone referred to it as the blah blah screen. Every user goes through it, you click, you want to install a browser plugin, you click, it pops up and says, this is going to have access to these various features. To most users, that's just blah blah, and they click OK. They don't even read it, they don't even look at it. It's become so pre-programmed that even IT administrators don't necessarily look at it. So you want to make sure that you educate users and that they're aware of what's being installed. We found that some organizations, rather than actually set up anything that blocks it, they just set up a tool that sends them a reminder. So after anyone installs something, they get an email that says, number one, we're aware you're installing this, and number two, here's the permissions you approved. And that's usually enough for users to say, wait, this is something important, let me look at it, and wait, why is this game I just installed accessing my email? Maybe I don't want to install it. So again, education of users is huge. And with that, I've covered the 5 items that we feel get overlooked quite often in Google Apps security. And I'm open to any questions that we may have had throughout the session.
All right, let's dive right in. We don't have too much time for questions, but there's a couple here that I think we should definitely get to. So there's a question sort of about a recent Google announcement. Kyle, could you turn on your webcam actually, so we can see you as you answer the questions? There we go. So how do you interpret the announcement that Google